I thought I knew my fiancée until an anonymous text message changed everything. You're bankrolling a wedding while your fiancé is living it up with other men in Napa. Minutes later, my phone filled with videos of the woman I loved in the arms of multiple strangers. 3 weeks before our wedding, I had a choice: confront her or execute the perfect disappearing act that would leave her standing alone in her wedding dress, surrounded by 200 guests, wondering where her groom had gone. My name is Preston Brooks. I'm 39 years old and work as a deep-sea robotics engineer for Ocean Tech Industries. My job involves designing autonomous vehicles that can withstand the crushing pressures of the ocean floor. It's challenging work that requires precision, patience, and problem-solving skills, traits I once thought I applied to my personal life as well. I wasn't looking for love when I met Samantha. After my divorce 5 years earlier, I'd thrown myself into my career, finding satisfaction in technological breakthroughs rather than romantic entanglements. My colleagues often joke that I was married to the ocean, and I was fine with that arrangement. Then came that charity gala for ocean conservation. My company had donated substantially, so I was obligated to attend, even though these social functions always felt like a waste of time. I was nursing a scotch at the bar, mentally calculating how soon I could make my exit, when I heard someone order a very specific vintage of Burlo. Bold choice, I remarked without thinking. Most people wouldn't recognize that gem. The woman turned, one eyebrow raised. Most people haven't spent 3 years studying in Piedmont, she replied with a hint of challenge in her voice. That was Samantha Green, confident, knowledgeable, and completely in her element. With her dark hair swept up elegantly and a glass of wine held expertly between slender fingers, she commanded attention without demanding it. We talked for hours that night. As an internationally acclaimed sommelier, Samantha's knowledge of wine was encyclopedic. But what struck me was her passion. She described flavors and regions with such vivid detail that I could almost taste the sun-baked Italian soil in her words. Wine tells stories, she said, about the land, the weather, the people who made it. Every bottle is a time capsule. By the end of the evening, I'd forgotten all about leaving early. When we exchanged numbers, it didn't feel like a gamble. It felt inevitable. Our first date was at a small wine bar she recommended. I arrived early, nervous in a way I hadn't been since high school. When Samantha walked in, heads turned. She wore a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, but carried herself with quiet confidence that made everything else seem overdone. "You clean up nice, engineer," she said, appraising my suit with an approving nod. That night, watching her describe complex flavor profiles to a starstruck waiter, I felt something shift inside me. Here was a woman who knew her worth, who had carved out respect in a competitive field, who spoke with authority but listened with genuine interest when I described my underwater robots. By the time I walked her to her door, I knew I wanted to see her again. When our lips met in a brief, electric kiss, I realized that my carefully constructed solitude was about to end. "Good night, Preston," she whispered, her fingers lingering on mine. "I think we might have something interesting here." I drove home with the windows down, feeling ridiculously young and hopeful. Little did I know that 3 years later, I'd look back on that night as the beginning of the most painful lesson of my life. Those first few months with Samantha were like nothing I'd experienced before. Our schedules were challenging. I'd often be at sea for weeks testing new prototypes, while she traveled to wine regions across the globe for tastings and consultations. But somehow, that made our time together more valuable, more intentional. When I returned from a 6-week expedition testing deep-sea navigation systems, Samantha surprised me at the dock. She'd cut short a trip to Napa Valley, just to be there when my research vessel came in. That night, over dinner at my place, we decided to make things official. "I've dated plenty of men who couldn't handle my travel schedule," she admitted, swirling a glass of Bordeaux she'd brought specifically for the occasion. "But you understand ambition. You respect it. Hard not to respect someone who's fought her way to the top of a male-dominated industry," I replied. "Besides, when you talk about wine regions, it's like getting a private tour of the world." Life fell into a rhythm. Between my oceanic expeditions and her international tastings, we created a home together in Boston. My sterile apartment gradually transformed with her influence. Wine racks appeared, along with artwork from the regions she visited. My technical journals now shared shelf space with her impressive collection of books on viticulture. By the end of our first year, Samantha had moved in completely. My colleagues, who'd once joked about my monastic lifestyle, now envied my relationship with this brilliant, beautiful woman who could recommend the perfect wine for any occasion and hold her own in discussions about marine engineering. During our second year together, we traveled whenever our schedules aligned. We explored the coastlines of Portugal, where Samantha introduced me to small family wineries while I showed her underwater drone footage of the Atlantic shelf. In Japan, we combined my robotics conference with her meetings at emerging wineries in Yamanashi. Each trip deepened our connection, building a library of shared experiences. In our third year, I was offered a project developing robotics for exploring underwater caves. Dangerous, but potentially groundbreaking work. Samantha was the first person I called. "Take it," she said without hesitation. "This is what you've been working toward." That support meant everything. When she was offered a prestigious position as head sommelier at an international hotel chain, a job that would increase her travel significantly, I returned the favor, encouraging her to accept. We'd made it work this long. We could handle whatever came next. On our third anniversary, I took Samantha to the small coastal restaurant where we'd had our second date. After dinner, walking along the moonlit shore, I knelt in the sand and offered her a ring I designed myself. Platinum with sapphires the color of the deep ocean. "We built something real here," I said, heart pounding. "Something strong enough to weather any storm. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears as she pulled me to my feet. "Yes," she whispered against my lips. 1,000 times yes. That night, holding her close, I felt an absolute certainty about our future. This was the real thing, a partnership of equals, built on respect and understanding. Nothing could shake that foundation. I was wrong. After the proposal, life became a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Samantha, with her impeccable taste and industry connections, took charge of most arrangements. Our social circles merged as engagement parties and planning sessions became regular occurrences. "What do you think about the Oceanographic Institute for the reception?" Samantha asked one evening, surrounded by wedding magazines and venue brochures. "They have that glass-walled room overlooking the harbor." "Perfect," I agreed. It seemed fitting. The ocean had been central to my career and now would frame the beginning of our marriage. Guest lists proved challenging. Between my research colleagues, Samantha's wine industry connections, and our combined family members, we were looking at over 200 people. The cost was substantial, but with both our careers thriving, we could handle it. "My parents want to contribute," Samantha mentioned during a budget discussion. "Dad's insisting on paying for the wine selection, obviously." We set a date for late September, after my scheduled deep-sea project and before her major wine conference in France. With the date confirmed, decisions multiplied: catering options, floral arrangements, photography packages. I focused on areas where I could contribute meaningfully, selecting the band, designing our custom rings, arranging transportation for out-of-town guests. My mother flew in from Chicago to help with preparations, instantly bonding with Samantha over shared organizational skills. "She's magnificent," Mom told me privately. "You've finally met your match." 6 months before the wedding, stress levels peaked. Samantha's international wine consultations intensified, while I faced deadline pressures with a new submersible prototype. Small disagreements erupted over seating arrangements and menu selections, trivial issues magnified by exhaustion. During one particularly tense evening, after arguing about whether to serve champagne or domestic sparkling wine for the toast, we both stopped and laughed at ourselves. "Listen to us," I said, pulling her close. "Fighting over bubbles when what matters is that we'll be together." Samantha relaxed against me. "You're right. I'm sorry. Sometimes I get so caught up in making everything perfect." "It already is perfect," I assured her. "Because it's us." That night renewed our perspective. The wedding was important, but it was just one day. Our marriage was the real project, one we'd spend a lifetime building together. If only I'd known how quickly that foundation could crumble. 1 month before our wedding, as final preparations were coming together, Samantha brought up something unexpected during dinner. "The girls want to take me to Napa Valley," she said, twirling pasta on her fork. "Sort of a last hurrah before I become Mrs. Brooks." I looked up from my plate. "A bachelorette trip?" Now, it's perfect timing, she explained. The harvest season is just beginning. Diana knows the owner of 3 boutique vineyards that aren't usually open to the public. Diana was a fellow sommelier who'd become one of Samantha's closest friends in the industry. My initial reaction was hesitation. We were in the home stretch of wedding planning, with vendor payments due and final decisions pending. Taking off for a week seemed like adding unnecessary stress. I don't know, Sam. There's still so much to do before the ceremony. That's exactly why I need this, she countered. I've been handling most of the arrangements while juggling client consultations. I'm approaching burnout. Her green eyes held mine. It's just 4 days. I'll be back before the final fitting. She had a point. Samantha had shouldered the majority of wedding logistics, coordinating with vendors while maintaining her demanding career. If anyone deserved a break, it was her. Who's all going? I asked, softening. Just the wine girls, Diana, Rachel, Megan, and Jennifer. You've met them all at industry events. I had indeed met these women, professionals who had established themselves in the competitive world of wine. They seem like a responsible group. Promise you'll actually relax and not just work? I asked, knowing Samantha's tendency to turn every vineyard visit into a networking opportunity. She smiled. Promise. This is about fun, not business. Later that night, I booked her flight as a surprise, upgrading her to first class. When I showed her the confirmation, her face lit up. She threw her arms around me. You're the best. I'll bring you back something special. The morning of her departure, I drove her to the airport. She was excited, dressed casually but elegantly in linen pants and a light blouse, her weekend bag packed with precision. At the drop-off, she kissed me deeply. I love you, she said. Thank you for understanding. Have fun, I replied. Just not too much fun. We both laughed, and then she was gone, disappearing into the terminal with a final wave. I drove home, thinking this break would be good for both of us. With Samantha away, I could finalize my surprise wedding gift, a honeymoon in New Zealand, where we could explore both renowned wineries and underwater caves. I had no idea that while I was planning our future, forces were already in motion to destroy it. With Samantha gone, I threw myself into work and final wedding preparations. 3 days in her trip, I was in my home office finalizing our honeymoon plans when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Usually, I let go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. No one spoke when I answered. Just as I was about to hang up, a text from the same number appeared on my screen. The message was short, but hit me like a sucker punch. You're bankrolling a wedding while your fiancé is living it up with other men in Napa. Wake up, buddy. My stomach dropped. Before I could process this, 3 videos loaded beneath the text. With shaking hands, I tapped the first one. There was Samantha in a dimly lit wine cellar, pressed against a tall, dark-haired man I'd never seen. His hands were tangled in her hair as she laughed, her body language unmistakably intimate. She looked drunk, happier than I'd seen her in months. My throat went desert dry as I opened the second video. This one showed her at a vineyard, sharing a bottle with a different guy. Her legs were draped across his lap, his hand resting high on her thigh as she fed him something from her plate. The third video knocked the wind out of me. Samantha was kissing yet another man outside what looked like a hotel room. Not a friendly peck. This was passionate, urgent. When they broke apart, she fumbled with a key card, pulling him inside. I sat there shell-shocked, my brain refusing to process what my eyes had just witnessed. This couldn't be real. Not Samantha. Not the woman I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks. With hands still trembling, I texted back. Who is this? How'd you get these videos? The response came quickly. Does it matter? Your princess isn't who you think she is. I needed to know who was sending these. After some back and forth, it hit me. The sender was Rachel, one of Samantha's wine girls on the trip. I confronted her directly. Why are you showing me this? Her answer was blunt. Because Samantha treats everyone like garbage. She's been talking smack about you, your family, even your boring job. Someone needed to pull your head out of the sand. Rachel sent more evidence, screenshots from their group chat where the women joked about Samantha's last hurrah before lockdown. Even worse were audio clips of Samantha herself. What happens in Napa stays in Napa, right, ladies? It's not like I'm married yet. Her voice, slightly slurred but unmistakable, destroyed my world in 13 casual words. I needed more proof before confronting Samantha. This could still be some sick joke or manipulation. I reached out directly to Rachel, asking for a call. I didn't want to be the bearer of bad news, Rachel said when we connected. Her voice carried no satisfaction, just resignation. But someone had to rip off the Band-Aid. Why would she do this? I asked, still struggling to reconcile the woman in those videos with the Samantha I thought I knew. Rachel's laugh was bitter. Because she could. Because she's always gotten away with it. Look, Samantha's brilliant with wine, but she's toxic with people. She treats her friends like accessories. Has she done this before? The question hurt to ask. Let's just say this isn't her first rodeo. That business trip to Chile last year. Yeah, not entirely business. My mind raced back, calculating. Chile was where Samantha had gone to consult for a new winery. A 10-day trip during which her calls had been sporadic, explained away by poor reception in the mountains. I need to be 100% certain, I insisted. Can you send me everything you have? Rachel didn't hesitate. Minutes later, my phone was bombarded with more evidence. Additional videos showing Samantha with different men, screenshots of text conversations where she joked about her Napa flings, and most devastating, an audio recording for what sounded like a wine tasting. I mean, Preston's great on paper, Samantha's voice said clearly, the sound of glasses clinking in the background. Successful, stable, nice family money tucked away. But God, he can be so boring sometimes. All he talks about is ocean this, robotics that. At least these vineyard guys know how to have fun. Female laughter followed, then Samantha again. What happens on The Bachelorette stays on The Bachelorette. Am I right? I sat in stunned silence after the recording ended. The casual cruelty of her words cut deeper than the physical betrayal. I'd spent 3 years with a woman who saw me as little more than a stable meal ticket who couldn't have fun. Why are you doing this? I finally asked Rachel. Aren't you supposed to be her friend? I was, she replied, until I heard her talking about my pathetic divorce to strangers at the hotel bar. Samantha only cares about Samantha. You're actually getting off easy, finding out before the wedding. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I pored over every piece of evidence, looking for any sign this was fabricated or taken out of context. But the truth was undeniable. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was a stranger. Samantha's flight was scheduled to arrive at 2:15 p.m. on Sunday. I debated not picking her up, just letting her take a cab home to find me waiting with the evidence. But that felt cowardly. I wanted to see her face when she first saw me, before she knew what I discovered. I needed that one last piece of information. Could she look me in the eye and lie? I arrived at the airport 30 minutes early, parking in the short-term lot rather than the cell phone waiting area. This wasn't going to be a quick pickup. I stationed myself near the baggage claim, watching arriving passengers filter through the security exit. When Samantha appeared, rolling her carry-on behind her, she looked refreshed and relaxed, glowing, even. Her face broke into a smile when she spotted me, and she quickened her pace, throwing her free arm around my neck when she reached me. You didn't have to come inside, she said, kissing me hello as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't destroyed everything we'd built. I wanted to, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. How was Napa? Incredible, she gushed as we walked toward the parking garage. The harvest was just beginning at Silverado Trail. We got a private tour of the pressing room. She launched into details about vintages and soil conditions, spinning her elaborate lie with practiced ease. I nodded at appropriate intervals, studying her. Not a flicker of guilt, not a moment of hesitation. The woman beside me, chattering about wine tastings and vineyard views, was a consummate actress or a sociopath. Maybe both. In the car, she continued her performance, reaching across to squeeze my hand at stoplights, asking about my week as if she actually cared. Did you finish the seating chart? She asked. I was thinking we should move my cousin Daniel to table 6. He gets along better with the Boston crowd. It's handled, I said non-committally. She didn't catch the coolness in my tone, too wrapped up in her narrative. Oh, I brought you something. She dug through her bag and pulled out a bottle of wine. Limited release Cabernet. Only 200 bottles produced. The winemaker's a friend of Diana's. I glanced at the bottle, wondering if it had been gifted by one of her Napa conquests. Thanks, I said flatly. At home, Samantha wheeled her suitcase into our bedroom while I stood in the kitchen, hands braced against the counter, gathering my resolve. When she returned, she came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and pressing against my back. "I missed you," she murmured, lips against my shoulder blade. The bed at the hotel was comfortable, but it didn't have you in it. I stiffened, the irony of her statement too much to bear. Gently but firmly, I unwrapped her arms and turned to face her. "Which hotel bed are we talking about, Samantha? The one you shared with the dark-haired guy from the wine cellar? Or maybe the one with the vineyard owner's son? Or was it the sommelier from L.A.? I'm having trouble keeping track of your itinerary." The color drained from her face, her perfectly maintained facade cracking for the first time since her return. For one brief, satisfying moment, Samantha Green, always in control, always with the perfect response, was speechless. "What are you talking about?" she finally managed, but the slight tremor in her voice gave her away. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't add more lies to the pile. I've seen the videos. I've heard the recordings. It's over." Samantha's shock quickly morphed into damage control mode. Her eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape route before settling back on me with a carefully composed expression. "Preston, whatever you think you saw, it's not what it looks like," she said, her voice steady now. "Those videos must be misleading. Context matters." "Is this the context?" I replied, pulling out my phone and playing the audio of her mocking me and my boring job. Her face paled further as her own voice filled our kitchen. "That was just stupid drunk talk," she insisted when the recording ended. "You know how the girls and I get when we're wine tasting. It doesn't mean anything." "And the men? The kissing? The hotel rooms? Do those mean anything?" My voice remained calm, though my hands were shaking. "Rachel sent me everything, Samantha. Everything." At the mention of Rachel's name, something shifted in Samantha's expression, surprise followed by calculated anger. "Rachel? You're going to believe that jealous bitch over me? She's been undermining me for years, trying to steal my clients." "She didn't force you into those men's arms," I countered. "She didn't put those words in your mouth." Samantha switched tactics, her eyes welling with tears that seemed to appear on command. "Baby, please. It was a stupid mistake. Too much wine, the atmosphere. It was just physical. It meant nothing." "Which time?" "Because there were multiple men in those videos." She flinched, then tried another approach. "We can work through this. Couples therapy, a postponed wedding, whatever you need." She reached for my hand. 3 years, Preston. Are you really going to throw away 3 years over one bad weekend? I pulled away, suddenly seeing everything clearly. It wasn't just one weekend, though, was it? Rachel mentioned Chile. How many other business trips involved extracurricular activities? Her silence was answer enough. That night, after Samantha had cycled through every possible manipulation, tears, anger, seduction attempts, guilt trips, I made my decision. I wouldn't cause a scene. I wouldn't demand explanations or apologies. I would simply disappear from her life, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. I waited until she finally fell asleep, emotionally exhausted from her performance. Then I called my brother, James, the only family member who lived nearby. "I need to meet with you and Mom and Dad tomorrow," I said quietly, stepping onto the balcony so Samantha wouldn't hear. "It's important, and I need a place to crash for a few days." "What's going on?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "The wedding's off. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just don't tell anyone else yet." After hanging up, I stood looking out at the city lights, feeling strangely calm. My entire future had just imploded, yet I felt more clarity than I had in months. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been investing in a relationship with someone who viewed me as little more than a convenient backdrop for her life. The next morning, I acted normal, made coffee, told Samantha I had meetings all day, kissed her goodbye. She seemed relieved, thinking we'd moved past the confrontation, that I decided to forgive her indiscretions. "We'll talk more tonight," she said, squeezing my hand. "We'll figure this out together." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It was the last time I would see her face to face. The meeting with my family was one of the hardest conversations of my life. We gathered at James's apartment that afternoon, my parents having driven in from their retirement home in Rhode Island. The shock on their faces when I showed them the evidence was painful to witness. "I can't believe it," my mother whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "She seems so perfect for you." My father, always the pragmatist, Move quickly past shock to logistics. What's your plan, son? The wedding's 3 weeks away. There are deposits, guests flying in. I'll handle the financial side, I assured him. What I need from you is something different. I laid out my strategy. I would disappear without confrontation or drama. No tearful scenes, no public humiliation, just absence, complete and total. It was the one thing someone like Samantha, who thrived on managing perceptions, wouldn't be able to control. Don't come to the wedding, I instructed them. Don't answer her calls when she starts looking for me. Don't engage at all. You're just going to leave her at the altar? My mother seemed troubled by this. It's not about revenge, I explained. It's about removing myself from a toxic situation cleanly and completely. Over the next few days, operating from James's guest room, I executed my plan methodically. I contacted my banking institution and removed Samantha from all accounts. I spoke with my company about an immediate transfer to our Seattle division, a position I'd previously declined because Samantha's career was centered in Boston. They were happy to accommodate, especially when I mentioned I could leave immediately for a deep-sea project off the Washington coast. I arranged for a moving company to pack and ship my personal belongings once I was gone. Not everything, just irreplaceable items like family photos, personal documents, and specialized equipment. The rest, furniture, kitchen items, things we'd bought together, I left behind. I wanted nothing that would remind me of our shared life. The day before the wedding, I left James's apartment for the airport. My new life in Seattle awaited. A furnished company apartment, a challenging project, and 3,000 miles between me and the woman who had shattered my trust. I imagined the scene that would unfold tomorrow. Samantha at the Oceanographic Institute in her wedding dress, growing increasingly concerned as the scheduled ceremony time passed with no sign of me. Her increasingly frantic calls to my phone going straight to voicemail. The whispers among guests as minutes stretched to an hour. The humiliation as she finally had to announce that there would be no wedding today. Would one of my family members leak the videos? I hadn't asked for that, but I couldn't control their actions. Either way, Samantha would face the consequences of her choices in the most public manner possible, surrounded by everyone who thought they knew her. As my plane took off, I felt a complex mix of emotions, grief for what I thought we had, anger at her betrayal, but predominantly relief. The Preston who landed in Seattle would be different from the man who had proposed to Samantha a year ago. More cautious, perhaps, but also more authentic. I would no longer compromise myself to fit someone else's narrative. The engagement ring I designed remained in a sealed envelope on James's kitchen counter, along with a note containing just 5 words. The truth always comes out. 6 months after my disappearing act, Seattle had become home. The deep-sea project was challenging and fulfilling. My new apartment overlooked Puget Sound, and I'd even made a few friends who knew nothing about my previous life or spectacular non-wedding. I heard about the aftermath secondhand, mostly through James. He described the scene at the Oceanographic Institute as epic chaos. Samantha had arrived early, spending hours getting ready in the bridal suite. When I failed to appear for our first look photos, she'd initially been annoyed, then concerned, then frantic. Guests arrived to find a bride pacing in backrooms, bridesmaids making increasingly desperate phone calls, and my groomsmen awkwardly admitting they had no idea where I was. The wedding coordinator, sensing disaster, delayed the ceremony once, then twice, before Samantha's father finally addressed the assembled crowd to announce that today's event was postponed. What happened next depended on who you asked. According to James, my father, never one for public scenes, had silently walked out with my mother. But apparently, Diana, Samantha's supposed friend, had been drinking heavily at the open bar that had started without a ceremony to anchor it. As guests were confusedly gathering belongings, she'd stood on a chair and announced to the room, "He found out what happened in Napa, you know." That was all it took. Within days, the videos had circulated through our social circles. Samantha's carefully cultivated reputation imploded spectacularly. She tried reaching me, of course. Hundreds of calls, texts, emails, first angry, then pleading, then bargaining. I blocked each new number, each new email address. She even flew to Seattle once, showing up at my company's office, only to be politely but firmly turned away by security. Eventually, the attempt stopped. I heard she'd moved to California, taking a position with a new winery. Good. 3,000 miles wasn't enough distance. An entire continent between us felt more appropriate. As for me, the experience changed me, but not in the ways you might expect. I didn't become bitter or untrusting. Instead, I became more authentic, more discerning about who deserved my time and energy. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I'd gone through with the wedding, unaware of Samantha's true nature. Years of my life wasted, perhaps children brought into an unstable home. By sending those videos, Rachel had done me an uncomfortable favor, removing the blindfold before I walked off a cliff. 3 lessons stayed with me. First, trust your instincts when something feels off. Second, someone's public persona often hides their private reality. And third, the way you leave a situation is just as important as how you enter it. I chose to exit with dignity rather than drama. In the end, that decision allowed me to start my new life without the weight of unresolved anger. The past remained where it belonged, behind me.